All right. So, a very good evening to all. International Council for Circular Economy welcomes you to the 12th episode of the third season of our Circular Chat. We are extremely excited to be back with another episode on the series of climate change. I'm Susanna, and I'm very happy to welcome again our guest speaker today, Mr. Shawahiq Siddiqui. So, welcome to the show again.
Pleasure to be here, Susanna. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So just a quick introduction about Mr. Siddiqui. Mr. Siddiqui is a people's lawyer deeply involved with the communities impacted by environmental issues and represents them in courts and other forums. So our last episode was also held with Mr. Siddiqui, and this time, since we're focusing on climate laws and policies, today we'll have a discussion with him again. So just to begin with today's session, and before we actually delve into the nitty gritty of the same, so would you like to give us an oversight of the current pace at which climate issues are being tackled by respective laws and policies?
Well, it can be a long overview. Uh, Thank you once again for this interesting topic. In fact,
Yeah.
the topic of climate litigation that we had the last time and climate justice, in fact, are closely related, and I would say unrelated at the same time. Uh, if you delve deep into the idea of justice itself. Now, conceptually, uh, the concept of climate justice has been much explored by, I would say, researchers, people interested in international law, international justice, and in fact by the financial companies. The coming up of climate bonds, carbon bonds, and other financial instruments. The way we are talking about carbon sequestration and the carbon trading, so this has been a topic which has been uh, much explored by researchers and markets, etc., but not much by policymakers or lawyers, practitioners, and judges at the same time. So one can only give you a sense of what one has seen in last so many years on this whole idea of quote unquote climate justice, which we have not seen recurring in any of the formal instruments or statements in India or in South Asia, so to say. So you have to still come across the acknowledgement within the region in terms of that there is this climate injustice done to a particular section of people or to communities or as a whole. Well, there is an international talk about it. Of course, countries have been talking about climate injustice done to them. So as an overview, I would say what is the larger picture? The larger picture to me seems to be there are two dimensions of this climate justice. One is this international dimension, which has been there since 1994, since the UNFCCC days and the Kyoto days, and we know what transpired in the last 3 decades for the run up to Paris Agreement 2016. So there is this international dimension where the island states and the least developed countries have forged an alliance and group, and they have been talking about climate injustice. From South Asia, Bangladesh had taken the lead, and it has brought the issue of small and the least developed countries at the brink of being vulnerable and suffering climate injustice. So there is this internationally, there is this whole dimension of climate injustice, which countries have been very vocal and I would say articulate about and try to put the best foot forward on negotiating a climate deal wherein they would not want to mitigate actions and would want to go on the development trajectory as the developed nations have gone and would want to put the responsibility on developed countries. So there are inherent paradoxes within that. So I'll come to that later. So that is the international dimension. And then there is a national dimension of climate justice and injustice. So nationally, as the Paris Agreement had gone in about 2016, around that time we did a little project on engaging with parliamentarians on what are their issues in terms of their preparedness of their constituency on climate change, and that gave very useful insights. Now on that, you see, nationally we have all the right kind of words placed in terms of climate adaptation, mitigation, missions, and action plans, and so on and so forth. But again, the idea of justice and injustice and its acknowledgement nationally, again, is not there. So in terms of the overview, I would say there is a big difference between what countries have been claiming internationally to seek their rightful place and equity, and what they have done nationally, domestically in their policies and laws in
Mm.
terms of acknowledging and addressing the idea of climate justice and injustice from the domestic, or I would say subnational, national perspective. So there is a gap between both justices, the climate injustice internationally and climate justice nationally.
Definitely, definitely, sir. And thank you for providing a very clear overview, Mr. Siddiqui. Moving on, so when it actually comes to climate laws and policies, what is the importance of clear reporting and disclosure here, disclosure frameworks here?
So you see, there is no special climate reporting or accountability mechanism that has been developed so far.
Mhm.
There are two areas within which you can clearly say that some work is happening. One is energy. So we definitely are trying to have some component of clean energy, also to say as a byproduct of that, reduce or have the energy mix, not have a total coal energy or the fossil fuels. That is one area. Second area in terms of climate action, which is again emerging, could be the e-mobility. The whole talk about having the public transport, the clean transport, and the sort of metros and all. So, and that is also connected to energy. So, in terms of uh, accountability on climate action, there is nothing special. The framework again falls squarely on the environmental law accountability framework that we have, the regular framework that can be understood. So in terms of if you look at the again cumulatively the larger picture, the industrial establishments, the developmental projects, or projects having long-term or big impact on natural resources and resilience and communities, they are only required to go through standard clearance mechanisms, which is environment impact assessment mechanism, or uh, connected to that, the talk about the social impact, the biodiversity impact, or now the cumulative impact assessment. So, which is not the law, let me tell you. So, environment impact assessment is under in EIA notification 2006 of Environment Protection Act of 1986, whereas cumulative impact is still something in progress. Which it is a court-driven concept, which wherein Supreme Court in one of the judgments involving the National Thermal Power Corporation has said that they should carry out the cumulative impact assessment or the carrying capacity assessment. So from that perspective, development as of now or sustainable development as of now does not involve any specific accountability or reporting mechanisms on climate issues. They have their standard criteria, impact on air, water quality and quantity, and divergence, and so on and so forth. So there is no special mechanism. So it would be safe to say that climate concerns are setting their foot in India
Okay.
or in South Asia, but is still not part of any accountability mechanism or the reporting mechanism.
Okay, okay. I think that explains itself, sir. So thank you for that. So we know about the two approaches, mitigation and adaptation when it comes to resolving climate issues. So could you please explain the difference between the two, mitigation and adaptation? And is there any other possible approach that can be taken up?
Well, so I'm not an expert on the technical side. So
Mm.
both are in fact highly technical areas involving a lot of science in terms of how do you mitigate and what sectors to go for
Yes.
mitigation. So that involves the both, I would say, the techno-economic perspective actually. So on
Mm.
one side you have the technology that helps you to mitigate. On the other side you have the economics around it,
Mm.
which is a big issue in at least in the developing countries like ours, or the aspirational countries in South Asia and other parts of the world like Brazil and so on and so forth. So, but from the law and the policy standpoint, put simply, mitigation is about looking at the cause of or the root cause of a problem. So for example, if your thermal plants are causing, say, X number of emission or X tons of carbon, uh, how do you bring down carbon emissions? By having less number of plants or by having your energy mix. Whereas mitigation is about living with the problems of the sector. So, for example, it is like saying that if you want to mitigate, well, erase the root cause. So close down the plant. So
Yeah.
that's mitigation. Have something else.
Hmm.
Adaptation is, well, there is no alternative. Now you have had it, or you have to have it. Say, given our positions globally that we want to develop, say, till 2050 and so on and so forth, by adopting adaptation. So which means, well, we'll have it, but
Hmm.
we will put some solutions, some symptomatic solutions to it. So which means to say that, well, you will have more floods and you will have more forest fires. Learn to live with it. So you will have more floods. So let's go about having flood proof, for example, housing. So let's have houses which are above the ground. So you
Yeah.
have floods and the floods will go and your houses and the civil property will remain intact. The whole philosophy of flood, living with floods.
Hmm.
And then you will have more forest fires. So let's have more choppers and jet sprinkling,
Right.
before April comes on Sariskas and Corbett's of the world. So let's
Yeah.
have forests sprinkled with water. Well, you will have forest fire because, well, we are emitting that much carbon. So one is mitigation is about, well, having a bypass or a surgery, whereas adaptation is about have a pill and you will have your BP and sugar control. So so it's like that.
Yeah, I get it. So I think you explained it pretty well with very relevant examples. So thank you, Shawahi, for that. So if you talk about the reality, okay, coming to reality, though over 170 countries have implemented environmental laws and policies, but the positive change in the environment has actually been very minimal. So what are the fundamental issues with the policies in place?
So we've been grappling with this for a long time, and it's a very relevant, but at the same time a very patent question. Now, nearly a year back or 6 months back, we prepared a roadmap for Department of Land Resources, which was in fact a kind of exercise, uh, just to take stock of why policies have remained unimplementable and what needs to change in them to achieve sustainable land and ecosystems management. So the whole project was about SLEM and about achieving sustainable pathways, basically under the Convention to Combat Desertification, the Prime Minister's 26,000 hectare of land degradation reversal pledge that he has taken, the bond challenge. So it was around that. And we tried to diagnose what has been the main issue around the non-implementation or ineffectiveness of policies, though we have had it. So 107 countries, as you said, the data. Well, I have not looked at what are the issues with 170 countries, but certainly issues around in here in India. We are 25, 26, 28 states, countries in themselves, a pretty large country, and it gives us a good sample size to look at issues from
Yeah.
different geographical, geological, and climatic perspectives.
Hmm.
So one experience from within India and then from South Asia. So one patent problem that has emerged in our understanding is again that, well, policies are worded very unrealistically, so to say. So very lofty words, very nice, nicely written policies, but very broad and unclear for the implementer. For an implementer of a district level, for implementer, for example, at the forest level,
Hmm.
or for the district forest officer level, and well, those policies are good for scholars and visionaries and people who would like to have a nice and a broader picture. All rightly said, well said, should be done. Nobody can deny what has been said. For example, the classic case of National Environment Policy 2006, or in fact the Before that, we have had in India, for example, 1992 Statement of Environment and Development. And even after that, 1994, we had another statement on environment, followed by the 2006 Environment Policy. Between that, we have had several things. National Biodiversity Action Plan. You
Yes.
read all of them together. Collectively, they mean good. They say good things. They try and achieve the same objective
Hmm.
of conserving, preserving,
Hmm.
doing away with the pollution. In fact, acknowledge the problems. So the one big problem is that policies here in this part of the world are best as acknowledgement of issues and problems. They do not provide solutions, they do not provide roadmaps, and do not provide specific time-bound actions to be taken. So they are visions at best, but not action plans or action-oriented policies with certain accountability mechanism.
Hmm.
I found it very difficult to locate a policy that had a target and implementing mechanism with an accountability saying that this institution is responsible for doing this. It is by default, you understand, well, it's a, for example, environment policy is brought out by the Ministry of National Environment Policy, by the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change. So by default, it is administrative agency. But if you
Hmm.
look at if the environment ministry would by itself will not be able to do much because land is a state subject, water is a state subject, pollution again goes down to the local agencies, the state level and the ground level agencies. So unless you have a clarity in terms of who will do what, policies will be no good, So that has been one problem. Second has been, we've been very good at I would say projecting the right intentions, but not really matching up the action to the intentions. So, for example, we have re-christianed. It just came to me. Re-christianed the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change around 2015 or 14. But is there a report card of what ministry has achieved after it was termed as Ministry of Climate Change? So where is the data to show, well, as a ministry on climate change or a ministry is spearheading climate change issues, what has it done systematically with the states, with the state level agencies, what instructions it has passed on climate preparedness, other than the business as usual that the state climate action plans are there and so on and so forth. There could be some data in terms of the number of saplings done by, but those are departmental works, let me tell you. Those are works under different heads. For international reporting, it is good to put it all together and send a report of compliance of UNFCCC saying that, well, we have done X number of things. But then in terms of real action that makes a real difference, in terms of that gives a real grassroots level preparedness, resilience, and conservation of resources, I think we have a long way to go.
Definitely, definitely, sir. And like you mentioned, there are numerous policies, but there is some problem when it comes to the implementation of these policies. So, do you think that that rather than coming up with several climate laws and policies, should the focus be shifted towards climate proofing other existing legislations? And if yes, how can this be done?
Well, to my understanding, the whole idea of climate proofing is as lucid as it can be,
Hmm.
for the simple reason that nobody is clear about, in fact, the very issue of climate change and adaptation and who needs to do what. So you talk to rural development, they have their program, and if you can give them a language, it's fine. Otherwise, everybody does their check dams and watersheds and neriga and plantations and and nurseries and compulsory reforestation. To say that you go and do climate proofing of other sectors, I think it will confuse a whole lot.
Hmm.
You see, we are still grappling with. So I was reflecting before we started this conversation on this very concept of. I mean, is it addressed anywhere, the climate injustice component? So
Hmm.
you see, in India, we have in the constitution we have this idea of social justice or social injustice, so to say. And then we try to do X number of things to bring certain people at par with with people who had not suffered injustice in the past, so socially backward, economically backward classes. Then we had this idea of environmental, or the notion of environmental justice or injustice evolved by courts. And then in Forest Rights Act, we have this idea of historical injustice done to forest communities. And then gradually, you see now we have this program housed in the Ministry of Law and Justice and Government of India, which is called Access to Justice Program. Now, I was trying to put all of this together, and we have taken justice to many areas and to many fields. And we have only tried to confuse and convolute things, where everybody is trying to figure out what to do. It is very similar to having, we call decentralized environmental governance. The reality of decentralized environmental governance, you have one Gram Panchayat and one Gram Sabha. And within that, the one person constitutes Biodiversity Management Committee, the Forest Rights Committee, the same person constitutes the Water Committee or the Land Committee. Yes. So you see, it is one and the same person at the grassroots heading different committees, and he does not know which committee and which talk is going on. So I would say for the moment, we are at a threshold where we have enough, so to say, in terms of the framework. And if that framework is mobilized in terms of climate adaptation, or if the government tries to do certain mitigative actions as well, I think we have enough in terms of taking care of for a certain period for the run up to when we are into climate proofing. And then we can probably, when there is a certain sensitization, certain awareness, we can talk about climate proofing. So I think the climate change, climate adaptation, mitigation itself has to be deciphered for the implementers. And if we do climate proofing of other litigation, we will overburden, I would say, other sectors with the core responsibility, with already the responsibility that they have, and they should be carrying out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Mr. Siddiqui, for your views on the question. And I'm sure our audience must have benefited from your insights. So, moving on to my last question for the day, I wanted to talk about the role of the private sector when it comes to the implementation and functionality of climate legislation. So, what role does the private sector actually play here, such as, for example, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero? And do you think that this inclusion of the private sector is effective?
Well, I would say private sector is the way forward. Private sector has a huge role in climate change adaptation and mitigation both. Mm-hmm. In fact, the private sector also has to, in fact, acknowledge and realize in their business practices that they are part of this ecosystem, this entire, the whole development agenda which is there. So the profit has to come with a certain responsibility. I'll give you an example now. For example, internationally now there's this talk around that world's freshwater ecosystems or rivers have become hostage to climate agreement or the Paris Agreement 2015-16. Why? In this whole aspiration of net zero emissions, we are going clean energy, and hydro constitutes a big part of it. Now, in terms of developing hydro, we are capturing, disturbing, cutting all the natural ecosystems, diverting them and producing energy. Now, here is a direct example where private sector has a role that it can go responsibly on developing hydropower, because water is fundamental and intrinsic to the climate adaptation and mitigation or climate preparedness. So if we lose river systems, we will have a very difficult scenario in countries populated like ours or in South Asia. So therefore, private sector has a huge role both in terms of preserving resources and in terms of developing the markets in a way which are sustainable. And private sector, I think, has a huge role. See, the crux of climate adaptation and mitigation or climate change or climate preparedness is in managing demand side. So if you manage demand side and if you reduce the demand, then I think half of the game or half of the battle can be won, in the sense that if you encourage people to consume sustainably, and then your production will become sustainable. Because once productions are sustainable, resources will be consumed less. The impact of the pollution and impact of the outcome will be less. The emissions will be less, and people then will be producing less waste. So therefore, the whole cycle, and probably this connects to the circular economy also, or the circular chat that we are having. So therefore, private sector, in fact, has as a big role in climate change, and it has to, in fact, bring demand side management in both production and consumption at the center of their business strategies. And therefore, I think private sector, along with the government, hand in hand, will be crucial for the future climate policy in India as well as in South Asia.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Siddiqui. It was a very insightful talk, and your views are really appreciated by us and, of course, the audience as well. So, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I would also like to thank everyone who decided to join our live session. We'll be back at the same time next week. And if you do not want to miss out on any updates or future conversations, do follow our social media pages and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, thank you so much and see you next week at the Circular Chat. Thank you, Mr. Siddiqui.
Thank you. Thank you, Sana.